You're from New York, huh? Yeah, you don't know a lot about Hollywood? No, I know Carl Reiner.
Silence in Hollywood never just happens. It's a currency, traded, guarded, and spent to protect big names, untouchable reputations, and billion-dollar brands. But the silence surrounding Albert Brooks, that wasn't the usual Hollywood hush money kind of silence. It was something way heavier. This wasn't a PR move or some manager's clever strategy. It was the kind of silence that comes when grief hits too deep to talk about. You could feel it, that quiet ache that sits in your chest and won't let go. What makes it even more painful is the backstory behind it. Albert Brooks and Rob Reiner weren't just Hollywood buddies. They went way back. We're talking 6 decades before the fame, before All in the Family, before Taxi Driver, before Rob became the iconic filmmaker everyone now praises. Back then, they were just 2 kids chasing jokes and big dreams, laughing about life before it all got complicated. Albert once said, "This is where we met, but of course there's nothing left of it, just like our friendship." Yeah, we sat on that bench. We did. That line hits hard. It's like he's mourning something long gone. So when Albert finally broke his silence and opened up about what really went down inside that Brentwood home, everyone stopped and listened. His words weren't polished or sugar-coated, no PR spin, no handlers whispering in his ear. It was raw pain, frustration, and regret pouring straight out of him, and it changed everything. Suddenly, the whole story flipped. People realized this wasn't just another Hollywood headline. Most skim through tragedies and arrests like it's background noise, but this time it hit different. Albert wasn't just grieving a friend, he was exposing years of tension, secrets, and emotional damage that everyone had conveniently ignored for way too long. Albert Brooks isn't holding back anymore. He's saying out loud what Hollywood insiders only whisper in secret meetings. The headlines may all be about Nick, spinning the story as one of endless love and heartbreak, but Albert's truth? It hits on a whole different level. For weeks, the press has been painting Rob and Michelle as these almost saint-like parents, people who gave every last ounce of themselves to help their struggling son. Now, no one's denying that they care deeply, that much is clear. But Albert's version of events? It's raw, it's uncomfortable, and it doesn't come with a pretty filter. He's not some distant commentator, he's someone who was there. He sat in that living room 3 years ago, 5 years ago, even a whole decade back, watching things crumble piece by piece while everyone else smiled for the cameras or stayed quiet out of fear of crossing some invisible Hollywood line. Albert said it felt like watching a slow-motion disaster where everyone knew something was wrong but pretended everything was fine. He's not blaming Rob for loving his son, that's not the message at all. What he's warning about is how love without boundaries can twist into something dangerous when it stops seeing reality. When love becomes blind, when it ignores red flags and excuses the chaos, it stops being love and turns into enabling. And that word, enabling, is the one Albert keeps circling back to. He's not shouting on late-night shows or staging some media circus. Instead, he chose something quieter but far more personal. He said, "This is the first time both of us have been back, right? Graduated over a certain age, it's against the law. Only for you, though. Well, life works best when you remember. You remember, nobody bothers you. That's the way it was. I looked great. When you have to confront the actual people you were with, oh my God, who are you?" Those words hit like a confession mixed with disbelief. He spoke privately to a small circle of old-school industry veterans, the ones who knew Rob long before the fame and flashing lights. And now, tiny fragments of that conversation are starting to leak out, and what they reveal is chillingly real. Albert didn't just talk, he laid it out. He gave details that painted the whole picture, down to the exact night about 8 months before everything completely fell apart. It was supposed to be simple. A calm dinner, just Rob, Michelle, Albert, and a few close friends around the table. No drama, no tension, just laughter and old stories. But then, out of nowhere, Nick walked in unannounced. And anyone who's ever been through family chaos knows exactly how that feels. The air changes in an instant. Albert said you could feel the energy shift like a cold wind blowing through the room. Conversations died mid-sentence, forks froze halfway to mouths, and people started exchanging quiet glances. But what stood out most was how Rob reacted, not with anger, not with fear, but with hope. That heartbreaking kind of hope that maybe, just maybe, this time things would finally be okay. Albert said when Rob looked at his son, it wasn't a man facing reality, it was a father still believing in a miracle that never came. He paused while telling it, and the people listening could feel that silence sink in, because hope like that can be beautiful, but when it's blind, it turns dangerous. Rob might have been a genius behind the camera, but Albert said he was naive when it came to real life. They met back in high school and stayed tight for decades. Rob was always the shy one, the kind who struggled to connect, especially with women. And then came that movie, the one where he met Michelle, and everyone said it changed everything. They said that's where he found the love of his life, but even perfect stories have cracks. Albert never said Nick was hopeless or that Rob failed as a dad. What he did say was something deeper, that pretending there isn't a storm won't stop the lightning. And that line hit like truth cutting through denial. Because what Albert was really talking about wasn't just one family in Brentwood, it was the whole culture of silence that Hollywood breeds, the image-obsessed system that rewards cover-ups and punishes anyone brave enough to speak up. He didn't sound angry, he sounded tired, like a man carrying guilt he couldn't shake. You could hear it in his voice, the weight of someone who wished he'd spoken louder, sooner. And once he shared that, there was no unhearing it. It burned into everyone's mind. Albert said when he looked at Michelle's face that night, what he saw wasn't irritation or disappointment. It was fear. Not the kind you fake for sympathy, but the real kind that grips you deep down. And that tiny detail mattered, because that fear didn't start that night. It had been haunting that house for years, hidden behind polite smiles and quiet dinners. Albert admitted that after seeing that look, something inside him broke. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, so he pulled Rob aside out to the patio where the night air was still and heavy. He didn't sugarcoat it or try to be gentle, he just asked straight up, "How long are you going to let him hold you hostage?" That question hung in the air like a slap. And what haunts Albert to this day isn't the question, it's Rob's answer. Rob didn't argue or get defensive. He didn't shout or storm off. He just looked tired, like a man who'd been carrying too much pain for too long. Then, in a quiet voice that cracked a little, Rob said something Albert never forgot. "If I stop, he ends himself." In Rob's mind, his money, his time, his constant presence, those were the only things keeping his son from the edge. Pulling away didn't just mean saying no. To Rob, it meant losing Nick forever. And that's where the tragedy hits the hardest, because he wasn't just trying to save his son, he was sacrificing himself to do it. Albert shared more about their history to explain why this cuts so deep. "My father died when I was young, 11 and a half, he said. I met Rob Reiner my freshman year of high school, and I became really close with his father, Carl. He talked about how Rob and Carl had their own struggles, the communication always strained. But Carl could dump all of what he wanted to say on me, Albert said, and I never got so much encouragement." He laughed softly, remembering those days, being just 16 and walking into a room full of legends like Mel Brooks, Norman Lear, and Neil Simon, making them laugh so hard they almost fell off the couch. It sounded magical, but underneath the laughter, the cracks were forming even back then. Because what Rob didn't realize, Albert said, was that by constantly protecting Nick, by shielding him from every consequence, he wasn't saving him at all. He was quietly inviting the danger into his own home. And that realization still chills Albert to this day, because deep down, he knows Rob's love may have been the very thing that destroyed him. This is the point where Albert's story starts making people squirm, because he doesn't play the sympathy card. He refuses to let mental health become a total excuse, not something to ignore, but definitely not a free pass either. He says we live in a world where every scandal turns into a sob story. Trauma, addiction, pressure, childhood pain, it's always something to explain the damage. And yeah, Nick had his battles. His struggles with substances weren't a secret to anyone, but Albert slices right through all that noise with cold honesty. He said he grew up around addiction. He knew plenty of people who lost their way, kids from good homes who spiraled hard, but even then, they didn't cross that line. He's not denying Nick's pain. He's saying there was something darker behind it, something personal and deliberate. Albert believes what was eating Nick alive wasn't just his mind, it was resentment. Real, burning resentment aimed at the people who loved him most. Not just frustration, but a deep anger that never got spoken out loud. And there's one emotion Albert says the media keeps ignoring completely: jealousy. Imagine being Rob Reiner's kid, growing up under a shadow that big. Every move you make gets compared to classics like The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Stand By Me. There's no breathing room, no chance to just be yourself when your last name already carries a legend. Albert remembered one specific day on set, years before everything fell apart. Someone mentioned Rob's name casually in conversation, and Nick's reaction was instant. He didn't laugh it off or make a joke, he snapped. Albert said, that wasn't rebellion, that was rage. Not playful, not annoyed, just pure fury. He said you could see it in his eyes, that quiet bitterness that builds when someone feels invisible next to greatness. It's the kind of anger that doesn't explode right away, it festers. It grows until it twists everything around it. From Albert's perspective, Nick wasn't chasing money that night, he was chasing destruction. He wanted to tear down the golden image, the perfect legacy, the untouchable pedestal everyone placed his father on. This wasn't a random spiral or a simple family tragedy gone wrong. Albert believes it was intentional, a slow-burn act of revenge meant to shatter the very symbol that haunted Nick since the day he was born. And that's what makes Albert's version so haunting, because it forces people to look past the easy explanations and face something far chilling. Now, Albert's not just sad, he's furious. He sees what's coming next and it's making his blood boil. The legal machine is already gearing up and the strategy's crystal clear. The defense attorney, Alan Jackson, smart, experienced, and ruthless, knows exactly which story to sell. They're going to paint Nick as a young man crushed by pressure, failed by society, and lost in a world that never gave him a chance. And Albert expected? He's terrified that people will buy it. He's been warning everyone who'll listen, don't let them flip this narrative, because he knows what comes next: blame shifting. They'll start twisting Rob's love into the problem, say he pushed his son too hard or not hard enough, say the Reiner name was too heavy to carry. They'll turn heartbreak into blame, turning the parents into villains in their own tragedy. Albert said, that's the cruelest part. The ones who are gone can't defend themselves. And that's exactly what he's fighting against, because Rob can't stand up and explain his choices now, can't tell his side of the story, can't stop people from twisting his legacy into something ugly. Albert even went back to one of his earliest memories, back when he was 16. He said, when I was 16, my father and Mel, it became the hippest thing to be Jewish. I'd come home from school, put on the 2,000-year-old Man album, and listen to it every single day. It was like a religion to me. I even wrote a joke for them once, and they used it. To me, that was the biggest thrill of my life. It was like hearing the sound of applause for the first time. He talks about that moment because it shaped who he became, someone who understood what pride and legacy really mean. So watching people now twist Rob's story into something tragic and cheap hits him harder than anyone can imagine. Albert says he's not chasing fame or headlines, he's stepping up because Rob can't. He's become the voice his oldest friend no longer has. If I don't speak, he said, the story gets rewritten by people who weren't even there. And that's what scares him most, how fast the truth can disappear when lawyers and media start spinning. Albert refuses to let that happen. He's not just a witness to the love that existed in that home, he's also a witness to the pain, the pressure, and the private exhaustion Rob carried for years. That's what's making everyone in Hollywood uneasy right now, because Albert's version of the truth doesn't protect anyone. It exposes what really happens when fame, family, and silence all crash together behind closed doors. This wasn't just chaos or confusion. Albert says it went way beyond that. There were moments that crossed straight into emotional harm, the kind that cuts deep, and Rob just kept taking it, never pushing back. One story Albert shared stopped the entire room cold. It was about Michelle Reiner, and it changed the way everyone saw the whole situation. Michelle was the peacekeeper, the artist, the one who kept the house from falling apart. She balanced the chaos with quiet grace, the creative soul behind the camera who could make even the darkest days look softer. Albert's voice cracked when he talked about her. He said that just a few weeks before everything came crashing down, Michelle called him, completely out of the blue. She didn't name names, didn't say what was wrong, but her questions said everything. She asked about security systems, about safe rooms, about how to stay protected. Let that sink in. This wasn't some random homeowner in a dangerous neighborhood. This was Brentwood, gated, guarded, locked down tighter than a vault. So who was she afraid of? Not strangers, not burglars. She was afraid of someone who already had the keys, someone who knew the codes, someone who could walk in like they belonged there. That's what froze Albert. He told her right then, change the codes, Michelle, bring in real security, put distance between you and whatever's got you scared. But now that advice haunts him, because he doesn't know if she ever followed through. I should have done more, he says quietly. I should have gone there myself. That regret sits in his chest like a weight he can't drop. He replays that call over and over, wondering if showing up that night could have changed anything. You can see it when he talks. His face tightens, his voice breaks. The guilt's right there, raw and real. Because this wasn't just losing friends, it was losing family. Albert and Rob weren't just close, they were like two halves of the same person. Their timing, their sense of humor, their creative spark, it was identical. They built their careers side by side, pushing each other, inspiring each other, laughing their way through decades of history. And now, that bond's been ripped apart. Losing Rob didn't just take away a best friend, it erased a piece of Albert's own identity. And that's what's changed inside him. The grief has hardened into something sharper, part pain, part fury, part refusal to let the truth fade away. Albert's not speaking from shock anymore. He's speaking from loss, the kind of loss that doesn't fade, the kind that demands answers no one in Hollywood wants to give. This isn't anger for the sake of noise, it's anger with purpose. Albert's tearing straight through Hollywood's shiny surface, ripping off that polished mask that powerful families hide behind. Normally, when a celebrity's kid spirals, the industry machine goes into overdrive. Rehab statements, respect our privacy posts, and carefully timed disappearances. But Albert's saying that very silence, the one meant to protect, was what fed the destruction. He believes things could have gone differently if someone had just stepped in years ago. There was one story he shared that stunned everyone in the room. Nick once threw a chair through a window. It should have been the breaking point, the moment where people said enough. But instead, nobody called the cops, because you don't call the cops on Rob Reiner's son. You call the private doctor, the handler, the fixer, the people whose job is to make it all vanish. And that's the accusation Albert's throwing out loud and clear. In his eyes, privilege didn't save this family, it trapped them. The power to dodge consequences meant Nick never faced the wall, never hit that real-life moment where you're forced to change. There was always a cushion, always a check, always someone cleaning up behind him, until suddenly there wasn't. Albert says the system failed because it was broken. It failed because it bent. It kept bending around the truth, around status, around reputation. And the price of that flexibility? It was devastating. He's not softening his words or hiding behind metaphors. He's coming for the illusion itself. People who've seen clips of him talking say they look like a completely different man, older, heavier, haunted. The quick humor that once made him famous seems buried under exhaustion and disbelief. When he talked about the moment he found out, it sent chills through everyone listening. He didn't get a call from the family, not even from close friends. He heard it secondhand from a business contact who picked it up on a police scanner. Imagine that, finding out your best friend's gone through radio chatter. Albert said he jumped in his car and drove straight to Brentwood, heart pounding, no plan, just panic and disbelief. When he got there, the flashing lights were already painting the street red and blue, police tape everywhere, neighbors whispering, reporters circling. He tried to push through the line, yelling that he was family, but it didn't matter. The officers didn't recognize him, or maybe they just didn't care. To them, he was just another older man shouting at a locked-down crime scene. That moment, standing helpless behind the tape while the people he loved were being treated like case numbers, burned itself into his mind forever. You can see it still weighing on him every time he talks. Now, with the trial set for January, Albert's message couldn't be clearer. He's done watching the truth get buried under Hollywood polish. He's not here to protect reputations anymore. He's here to expose what silence really costs. Albert's not sitting this one out. He's showing up. When the trial starts, he plans to be right there, front and center, sitting directly behind the prosecution. He wants Nick to see him, to look him straight in the eyes and know he remembers everything. Every promise made, every excuse spun, every check quietly written to smooth things over. Albert knows it all. He's not just another witness. He's a living record of years that never made the tabloids. And that's exactly what makes him dangerous to the defense, because he's not guessing, he's remembering. He's done being quiet, done protecting reputations that already cost too much. Meanwhile, the Reiner siblings, Jake and Roy, are asking for peace. They've been clear. They want privacy, they want space to grieve, and Albert gets that, he really does. But he also believes silence already destroyed enough, and this time he's not letting it win again. The siblings have publicly asked for forgiveness, and that's their right. They're grieving in a way only children can, trying to mourn their parents and their brother at once. It's impossible to imagine that balance, protecting the memory of Rob and Michelle while not completely erasing Nick from their lives. It's a fragile, painful line to walk, and they're walking it with remarkable grace. But Albert, he's not walking that same road, and he's been very open about why. He's not family by blood, which means he doesn't carry that same lifelong duty to forgive no matter what. He was Rob's friend, not his son. And the friend isn't looking for peace or closure, he's looking for accountability. Albert says, grief doesn't have to mean silence, and forgiveness doesn't have to mean pretending nothing happened. That's the difference. While the Reiner brothers choose calm, Albert's choosing truth. And that truth has put him on a collision course with some of the most powerful people in the industry. He's furious, openly calling out Hollywood's fake sympathy parade. He's sick of the long, polished posts, the heartbroken captions, the carefully crafted tributes from people who, let's be real, hadn't picked up the phone in years. He even joked bitterly, "Wait a minute, whoa, look at this," when someone showed him an old clip. Albert Brooks back at their high school, standing beside Rob, both of them pointing at their names on the wall of fame. "See that? There's me right there. There's you, still making each other laugh," he said, smiling through the ache. Then that smile fades, because Albert knows most of the same people now posting love and loss hadn't been there when Rob needed him most. Some ignored his calls, others slowly distanced themselves when things started looking messy. And then there are the ones who did know, who knew Nick was unstable, who whispered about it in private and still chose to do nothing. That's the part eating at Albert, the hypocrisy, the silence, the way the town moves on like nothing ever happened. But this time, he's not letting that happen, not again. Albert says the silence wasn't just in the home, it stretched across Hollywood. There were people who whispered about Nick's behavior, who warned friends quietly, but still kept the invites coming. They let him show up at parties, still let him hang around, all because of the name Reiner. Albert won't drop names in public, but everyone in those inner circles knows exactly who he's pointing at. He calls it performative grief, a public show of heartbreak with zero private responsibility. The social media tributes, the long captions, the sending love comments, they're just smoke. Albert's not buying any of it. He doesn't want sympathy posts, he wants answers. He wants to know who supplied Nick that night, who handed over the stuff that lit the fuse, who drove him to that house, and who stood by, silent, when it all went down. Albert's demanding that every layer of protection, every fixer, every quiet enabler get dragged into the light. That's why this story hits so hard. It's not gossip, it's not drama. It's a cold, real-world look at what happens when money, fame, and fear collide with addiction and unchecked behavior. This isn't about a scandal, it's about responsibility, about asking the question no one in Hollywood wants to touch. Where does love end, and where does accountability begin? Rob Reiner built a career telling stories where love always wins. The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Stand By Me. His movies made people believe love conquers everything, that love saves, that love survives all obstacles. But now, Albert's standing in the aftermath saying something nobody wants to hear. Love didn't stop this. He says love made it possible. Love gave access. Love kept doors open that should have been locked. It's a brutal reversal of everything Rob's legacy represented, and that's exactly why it cuts so deep. Because the truth doesn't fit the story Hollywood wants to tell. Albert shared a moment from the funeral planning that broke everyone listening. He was sitting with Jake and Roy going through old photos for the memorial. Rob smiling on set, Michelle mid-laugh, family vacations frozen in time. And then they came across that photo, 15 years old, the whole family together, Nick standing there, smiling, calm, normal. Albert said his gut reaction was pure anger. He wanted that photo gone, deleted, destroyed, anything but displayed. To him, it felt like a lie captured on paper, a happy moment that erased all the pain that came later. But the Reiner brothers stopped him. They looked at him and said, "No, that picture stays." To them, that wasn't a symbol of what went wrong. It was proof of who Nick used to be. A version of their brother that existed before the chaos took over, before everything shattered. That moment said it all. Albert saw a reminder of loss, but they saw a piece of love worth saving. And that's the heartbreaking divide between them. Albert's chasing truth, even when it hurts, while Jake and Roy are clinging to the fragments of family they still have left. It's messy, it's emotional, and it's real. And it's exactly why Albert refuses to let this story fade into another Hollywood cover-up. That difference in perspective says everything. That's where the real tension sits, the unspoken line between family and friend. The Reiner brothers need to remember the good, to hold on to who their brother used to be. But Albert, he can't untangle the past from what it became. Neither side is wrong, they're just carrying different kinds of pain. And the weight Albert's carrying, it's starting to show. He's in his late 70s now, and this kind of stress doesn't just fade away. It lingers in the body, in the bones, in the quiet hours of the night. Sleepless nights, endless replayings of what-ifs, anger that never really settles. Albert's hinted that he feels his own time slipping, not because he's in danger, but because grief itself changes a person. He says losing Rob wasn't just losing a friend, it was like losing a part of his own identity. They grew up together, built their careers side by side, survived Hollywood's chaos together. He shared a memory from a shoot years ago, remembering the madness, the laughter, the inside jokes that never stopped. "Rob was the only person who could make me laugh until I literally couldn't breathe," Albert said, eyes welling up. Now that laughter's gone, replaced by a silence that feels too heavy to bear. He's tried to watch their old films, tried to relive those golden days, but he can't. Every smile, every line, every scene brings back flashes he can't shake loose. The quiet, he said, is louder than anything. And that's exactly why he keeps speaking up. Not for attention, not for revenge, but because silence already stole too much. He refuses to let it take anything else. But there's one more loss Albert talks about, something people aren't mentioning enough. He believes Nick didn't just take Rob's life, he took his legacy. Think about it. How do you sit down and watch When Harry Met Sally now without feeling that shadow creep in? How do you smile at The Princess Bride without hearing the echo of tragedy underneath it? The joy's still there, but it's stained. The laughter doesn't land the same. It comes with weight, with guilt, with memories that won't fade. And then Albert dropped the most haunting detail of all. It had nothing to do with fame, money, or the industry. It was about Nick's eyes. He said that in the last few times he saw him, something was missing. Not sadness, not anger, not even intoxication, just emptiness. Albert described it like looking into an abandoned building, lights still on, walls still standing, but no one home. It was like the soul had already left, he said quietly. That image stuck with everyone in the room, because what makes it even worse is that Albert swears Rob saw it too. He said Rob recognized that emptiness but couldn't accept what it meant. He thought he could fill it with love, with time, with understanding. But Albert says that emptiness wasn't something anyone could fill. It had already hollowed Nick out from the inside. That's what breaks Albert now. The knowledge that both he and Rob saw the warning signs, but love kept them hoping when they should have been protecting. And that's the truth Albert can't stop telling, because silence, once again, would mean pretending it didn't happen, and he refuses to let the world forget what that silence cost. They were both staring at the same thing, but seeing two completely different realities. Albert looked and saw a warning, flashing red lights telling him to step back, to protect himself before the chaos swallowed everyone. Rob looked and saw pain that needed comfort, love, and endless patience. That's where the heartbreak really lives, in the gap between how they saw the same moment. Albert said it best. One man ran towards the fire carrying hope like water. The other man was shouting to stay away, and the man with the water got burned. That's the tragedy in one line. Now, with the January trial closing in, Albert's made one thing crystal clear. He's done being quiet. The old Albert, the quick-witted comedian, the background observer, he's gone. What's left is a man standing in truth, stepping into a new role, even if the world isn't ready for it. He knows exactly how this system plays out. He's watched the way stories twist inside a courtroom, how juries get swayed by emotional backstories and sobbing testimonies, how defense teams spin childhood pain into justifications that blur right and wrong until nobody can tell the difference. Albert knows those tactics too well, and he refuses to let them rewrite this one. That's why he's speaking now, drawing a line in the sand that even Hollywood's gloss can't cover. His message cuts sharp. Rob and Michelle weren't villains. They weren't cold or careless. They were loving parents, flawed, human, and ultimately targets because of that love. And that's the hardest truth of all. It's not comfortable. It doesn't fit inside sympathy posts or PR statements. But Albert says silence already costs too much. Truth, no matter how harsh, is the last real form of respect. No comforting lies, no gentle rewrites, no pretending the ending was peaceful when it wasn't. And there's one detail he refuses to let fade: the fear. Albert swears that on that final night, Rob was afraid. Not calm, not resigned, afraid. He doesn't want people imagining some quiet cinematic ending. He wants them to know there was panic in that house, real confusion, real terror, because that matters. It matters in court, it matters in truth, and it matters to accountability. This isn't revenge, it's grief with a mission. Albert's anger is just sorrow sharpened into purpose. He wants the pain to mean something. He wants the world to stop sanding down the edges of what happened just to make it easier to digest. So when the updates about the Reiner case start flooding timelines, when the media spins the same tired cycle of sound bites and photo montages, Albert wants people to stop scrolling and think. Picture him sitting in his home, surrounded by decades of shared laughter, scripts, memories, inside jokes that will never be told again. Imagine the phone call he's waiting for. Not the one about court delays or new evidence, but the final one. The one that says accountability has finally landed. But even when that call comes, Albert knows peace won't follow. Justice doesn't bring people back. It doesn't refill the empty spaces, doesn't restore the laughter that used to echo through their lives. This isn't one of Rob's movies. There's no sudden redemption, no clean ending, no music swelling as the credits roll. There's just the slow fade that real life delivers, and Albert is standing right there, refusing to look away. He keeps saying the same thing. The signs were there. The warnings were loud enough, but no one wanted to hear them because facing the truth meant facing discomfort, and Hollywood never likes discomfort. And now comes the real question. Not how this story ends, because it will, but whether anyone actually learns from it. Because the media will try to soften it again. They'll play award clips, show smiling photos, talk about healing and moving on. But Albert's here to remind everyone the wound isn't closed. It's still bleeding, still raw, still real. And maybe the hardest truth of all is this: the people closest to us aren't always safe. Sometimes the danger isn't a stranger, it's someone we love too much to see clearly. And sometimes the only person who notices, the one screaming from the sidelines, desperate for someone to listen, is the friend watching the fire build, powerless to stop the crash. So Albert leaves the question hanging in the air, heavy and haunting. Are we finally listening?